Hello everyone. We will be covering the first and second parak of Rambam's Shemonah Perakim, and in the first parak, Rambam really kind of sets our base, and he covers the human nefesh, right, the human soul. And the reason why he wants to discuss it is because he's trying to figure out how to achieve optimum health or how to heal the soul. Now, in order to understand that, as an analogy, Rambam gives us a mashal of a human body, and he says if a doctor were to come to a person and either is trying to cure the sick or is trying to help the person achieve and maintain good health, then the doctor needs to understand that the body has different parts to it, and the doctor has to understand not only that the body has different parts, but how those different parts interact with each other. For example, he needs to understand how the digestion works with the kidneys and the stomach and the heart, and how like all these things factor into a person's mobility and their like muscular development, and of course their brain development, etc. And so too, says Rambam, does a person who wants to achieve optimum spiritual health need to understand that there are 5 different parts to the soul, to the nefesh. And the reason why he says this is so important to understand is because a person who wants to either avoid bad things or bring on like good things to improve their health, right, to engage in good things, you need to understand like what the basic structure is of the nefesh in order to go about doing those things in the exact same way that a person would want to know how to achieve physical health. If a person wants to achieve physical health, there's a certain diet he needs to eat, there's a certain amount of exercise he needs to have. So too with the nefesh in its unique way. And so he breaks it down. He says the nefesh is comprised of 5 parts. The first is hazan, right? The nutritive. This belongs to medicine. He's not overly concerned with this. It's not our subject. It's like the things with the digestion and fine. And the second is hamargish, right? The senses, hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, and feeling. That's pretty self-explanatory. The third is the imagination, right? Hamedame, also fairly self-explanatory. And then the fourth is hamit orer. Now, these translations that I'm giving are the ones I found on Sefaria, and they translate as the appetitive. And namely, that really, it's what makes you desire or loathe a thing. Person that makes you, it's the things that makes you jealous, that makes you angry, that makes you effectively, it's what prompts human action. So that's the fourth, and we'll talk about this more, as I'm sure you could tell. And then the fifth and last is reason. It's hasichli. And it says, the functions of this are partly practical, partly speculative. Fine. And the final chapter of this first parak of Shemonah Perakim was, I think, summarized by Rabbi Jacobs very well. He's giving like a mini series on it that's sent to Machon Yaakov guys. And he says like this. If we're to look at Rambam's final paragraph in the Shemonah Perakim, I'm just going to actually read it for us. He says like this, at least the first half. So, Veda, shezot ha-nefesh ha'achat asher kidem sipur kachotea o chelkea hi kachomer, v'asechel latzura. וכשלא תגיע להצורה, יהיה מציאות ההכנה ולקבל הצורה ההיא לבטלה, וכאילו היא מציאות הבל. Fine. So know, however, that the soul whose faculties and parts we have described above, right, that's what we just spoke about, and which is a unit, may be compared to matter, chomer, and that it likewise has a form, tsura, which is reason. And to this Rabbi Jacobs explained that this language of chomer and tsura is used also by the Ran, who's also a Rishon, and it's used a lot by the Maharal of Prague. And what this means is matter, this chomer, is just kind of like a raw stuff. It's just things, and it doesn't really have any value until it's put to use, and that's where the tsura comes in. And so that's what we need our sechel for. Our sechel is what takes that chomer and is able to kind of shape it and mold it so that it becomes a useful chomer, something that's useful. And as an analogy, Rabbi Jacob says, business could have many assets, but if they don't use those assets in the proper way, then those assets are valueless, they're worthless. Or a person who has many skills and many talents, again, if they don't put them into action, then it's worthless. It doesn't really make a difference. So there's the idea of there's the chomer, and there's the tzura that's imposed upon it by the sechel. And the Rambam continues, if the form, right, reason, does not communicate its impression to the soul, then the disposition existing in the soul to receive that form is of no avail and exists to no purpose. It's hevel. And then Rambam quotes a pasuk from Mishlei. Also in the want of knowledge in the soul there is nothing good, right? The pasuk in Hebrew says, V'u amru gam belo dat nefesh lo tov. So here what we're saying is, we're meant to kind of take our sechel and impose its tsura onto the chomer of the soul. Now, the reason why this is so important is really taken up in the second parak, and this is where we're going to be going right now, and that's our focus, really. So the very first sentence by the Rambam in the second parak really kind of sets the tone for what we're going to be speaking about. He says like this: Da שהעבירות והמצוות התוריות אומנם ימצאו בשני חלקים מחלקי הנפש, החלק המרגיש והחלק המתעורר לבד, ובשני אלו החלקים יהיו כל העבירות והמצוות. It says, know that transgressions and observances of the law have their origin only in two of the faculties of the soul, namely, right, hamargish, the senses, v'mitorer, the appetite of that which makes you feel angry, or jealous, or sad, etc. And that to these two faculties alone are to be ascribed all transgressions and observances. Notice how Rambam is immediately keying in first on the idea of bechira, of free will, but most importantly in bechira with regards to actions. What does a person do? What does a person not do? That's what Rambam is really focused on and what he really wants to draw our attention to. And that's why he says, right? And he explicitly says that the faculties of nutrition and imagination do not give rise to observance or transgression, for in connection with neither is there any conscious or voluntary act. Rambam is immediately making sure that we understand that Judaism's prime focus is on the world of action. He concedes later on, yes, hasichli, it's true, in a person's intellect, there is some shaykhut to mitzvahs and averas there, in terms of like amuna in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but for the vast majority, and this is, as far as I understand, unanimously agreed upon by all authorities, that those are very few in number. Thought-based mitzvahs are very few. The vast majority of the 613 are action-based. And that's why Rambam is most concerned about senses, right? Touch, hearing, sight, etc. And the mitorah, I guess, what gives rise to midot. And the reason why he says this is because, again, with regards to hazan, right, digestion, or a person's physical makeup, doesn't make you a good or bad person. Right? A person might have bad digestion, right? He just has maybe a cardiovascular disease, or his muscles atrophy for some reason. Doesn't make him a good or bad person. That's not a conscious decision. And moreover, a person's imagination. This is a different topic. Maybe we'll cover it later. The person's imagination, and by way, also doesn't really play a role in a person's moral development. And by way of proving this, if you will, Rambam says a person's digestion and a person's imagination run away with him at night when he's sleeping. When a person's sleeping, he can't make a conscious decision. He can't make a conscious choice. And therefore, these two things are not his focus. He's not interested in developing these because he's like, this is not where a person's free choice lies. Mitzvahs and averas have no shaykhut to those things. And so, focusing on the things that it does have shaykhut to, Rambam continues. And he wants to speak about it. And by the way, just to prove that those two areas are really where the mitzvahs lie. Again, let's focus on the senses. So this is the easiest. In terms of touch, that's the vast majority of mitzvahs. And you pick up the lulav, you put the tefillin, that's how you distribute tzedakah. All those things have to be done through action. Hashavat aveda, if you want to return a lost object, obviously you have to give it to them. That also, by the way, corresponds to seeing. A person needs to see the aveda. If you see something that doesn't belong to you, or if you see someone whose donkey is bearing a heavy load, then you have to go help him. And moreover, there's the mitzvah of re'iyah, right, that's discussed in Kiddushin, that's of coming to Yerushalayim on the Shalosh Regalim. There's, of course, tasting, making brachas on the things that you eat, on hana, right, on our enjoyment, hearing. At the very least, there's kol shofar, right, a person has a mitzvah to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and smell, a person can smell the besamim and make a bracha on that. The point is, these five senses are directly related to mitzvah observance. So that's that. How about the mitorah? And here again, Rambam is speaking about midos, and he gives a long list of positive qualities. And just to read them off. So here we go. So he says, Aval ha'malot hamidot yimtzu lechel hamitorah levado. So a person's good characters, you'll only see in a person's mitorah, right? The appetite of a person's, I guess, perhaps like a more emotional side. And he says, Umalat ze hachelek rabot meod, kazehirut, right? A person being particularly cautious, as in a yerachet, a person who's fearful of sin. Vanadivut, right? Being generous. Vayosher, a person who's straight-laced. Vanava, a person who is humble. And he goes on and on. And then he says, V'pritiyut ze hachelek hu lechaser belu lohosif b'hem. And here's again where Rambam introduces his golden rule. A person needs to go on the straight path, and he can't veer either left or right. He can't do too much of it or too little of it. Too little of it is fairly straightforward. Why not too much of it? So there was Rav Bernstein told a story about his father, Zatzal, who had attended a wedding, and there was a person who was called up for one of the Sheva brachot, to make the bracha. Now, this person should have expected to be called up. He was one of the people who would be reasonable to assume would be called. And this individual had placed himself all the way at the back of the crowd because he was not enough. He didn't want to be seen too much. He didn't want to call attention to himself too much. However, he was called up, and because he was at the back and it was a crowded place, for 10 minutes, everybody needed to kind of shift and move as kind of the crowd had to clear in order to allow him to make his way all the way to the front. And Rav Bernstein says his father said, if you think that, I believe it was Rav Bernstein's father, if you think you're going to be called up for Sheva brachot, just come to the front. Because now everybody's noticing just how humble you are by putting yourself at the back, as everyone notices that, look at you, look how humble I am, A, that I'm at the back, and second, that I'm so great that I'm receiving this bracha. The idea is, don't be too humble. Just make sure you're right in the middle, the golden means. And again, Rambam is particularly emphatic about this idea of just noticing how it's specifically the world of action that we are concerned about a person's conscious decisions. And then I'll just end with this, if you will. This is even seen in popular culture. In the 6th book of Harry Potter, when Harry is going back, spoiler alert, when Harry is going back to delve into Dumbledore's memories of Voldemort, right, when he was a kid, Voldemort speaks about his experience, and he tells him, how the Tom Riddle, this kid, was kind of stealing things and hurting people, and he also could speak to snakes, right? That's a parcel tongue or a parcel mouth. And so Dumbledore says, he was speaking about Voldemort. He said he had already discovered they had some measure of control over them and begun to use them consciously, and this was disturbing to him. And moreover, and as you saw, they were not the random experience typical of young wizards. He was already using magic against other people to frighten, to punish, to control. The little stories of the strangled rabbit and the young boy and girl he lured into a cave were most suggestive. I can make them hurt if I want to. That's what Tom Riddle said. And then Harry, is getting excited. He's like, and he could also speak to snakes, use his parcel mouth. And then Dumbledore flicks this away and he says, yes, indeed, a rare ability, and one supposedly connected with the dark arts. Although, as we know, there are parcel mouths among the great and the good too. In fact, his ability to speak to servants did not make me nearly as uneasy as his obvious instincts for cruelty, secrecy, and domination. Now, notice here the common theme here. J.K. Rowling is focusing on a really deep idea. She's not concerned with a person's natural abilities. Her question is, what is he consciously choosing to do with those abilities? That here is, in a way, a lahavdil, but what Rambam is really trying to bring out. Not interested in things that you just have naturally, the things that you just have even in your sleeping. What do you choose to do with them? That's Rambam's focus. We'll continue more next week.